It's been some years now since the vast majority of international analysts declared that the absolute domination of the world by the United States had come to an end. That scenario that resulted from the fall of the Berlin Wall and the end of the Soviet Union, and that nurtured a unipolar world presided over by Uncle Sam, had diminished for many. Why? Well, for one very simple reason: because of the rise of a country that began to stand up to the United States. And no, obviously, we're not talking about a renewed Russia after the fall of the USSR, but about the Asian giant. We are talking, of course, about China. And no wonder. After all, we are talking about a country that has become the largest industrial power and the second largest economy on the planet. China is much closer to American gold than Japanese bronze. But this is not just an economic issue. China is also, and increasingly so, a major military power. In fact, leaving nuclear capabilities aside, China may already have the second most capable armed forces in the world. And it stands to reason that with such industrial, economic, and military power, the end of the unipolar world is not just a foregone conclusion, it is already a fact. Of course, keeping pace with the United States is no easy task. And although China has made impressive efforts, many analysts are already pointing to the Asian giant's fatigue, especially since a large modern military needs one thing above all: money. And so today, here on VisualPolitik, we are asking a few questions. What is China's situation? Is it possible that the slowdown, or even the crisis, is slowing down its military commitment? How is it getting stronger? Did you know that China already has the largest naval force in the world? What could this mean? Well, let's answer all these questions. But first, did you know that the price of what you can buy online can vary depending on your geographical location? Well, pay attention, because this is something that is happening right now with tourism companies such as airlines and hotels. These type of companies usually adjust their rates according to the country where the user is located. So be careful where you connect from, because it's likely that they will take advantage of you. Recently, a NordVPN study conducted in the UK showed how some prices can be twice as expensive when it comes to renting a car, for instance. So what can you do to avoid these price inequalities? NordVPN is the answer for avoiding these price jumps. When you connect to one of their servers, your real location is kept hidden and you have the option to choose a different location. With this, you'll be able to compare prices and discover the best deals for your vacation. In addition, NordVPN allows you to enjoy unlimited content from different parts of the world without geographical restrictions. It's compatible with multiple devices, and you can connect up to 6 of them with the same account. Also, NordVPN's threat protection will keep you safe, working in the background even when your device isn't connected to a VPN server. So don't waste any more time and purchase a 2-year plan plus 4 extra months by going to nordvpn.com/VPEN. And if you're not satisfied with the service, no problem. You've got 30 days to try it out. And if you're not convinced, you are guaranteed a no obligation money back guarantee.
Xi Jinping, the economic anti-guru?
For decades, China has defied all evidence and predictions to become the largest autocracy and a fairly successful authoritarian regime. If it was once thought that development would bring greater openness and higher levels of freedom, the facts have shown that this thesis was not correct. Since the 1970s, with Deng Xiaoping's economic reforms and open-minded policies, and thanks to its abundant demographics, energy, and water resources, China managed to lift 800 million people out of poverty and grow by 10% per year, until the end of Hu Jintao's term in 2012. However, since Xi Jinping came to power, and particularly in recent years, China has begun to take a different path. Since the arrival of Xi Jinping to the presidency, some of the measures that brought the People's Republic of China to the world's podium have suffered a major setback. Xi Jinping has devolved into much more authoritarian and interventionist forms. He has strengthened the state surveillance apparatus, prioritized state-owned enterprises, SOEs, including showering large amounts of capital on many zombie state-owned enterprises. What's more, Xi's China no longer has the advantages of its predecessors. Wage costs have risen, the real estate market is saturated, the country is importing more and more energy, and China's population is aging and shrinking. By 2050, estimates suggest that 700 million workers will have to support 500 million pensioners, 300 million more than today. Therefore, it is not surprising that China is no longer showing the growth that it had before the arrival of Xi Jinping. In fact, since the 2008 crisis, China's economic growth has practically continued to fall. Xi has failed to slow the downturn in China's economy. And this, despite the fact that he has used huge public spending packages to try to do so. And it's not just about that. As we've told you many times in our Patreon bulletin, the weekly snapshot, the Chinese economy is facing a lot of problems. And by the way, if you like what we do and you want to help us grow and keep improving, you can join the VisualPolitik community on Patreon at patreon.com/VisualPolitik. Also, for a small contribution, you can receive a lot of extra content and exclusive gifts, and I'll leave you the info in the description. But having said that, if we're talking about the problems in China, we have to take into account this fact as well. Look at this.
China's debt to GDP ratio rises to record 279.7% on credit boom.
This is coupled with the closure of 4.4 million businesses that were forced to close due to the harsh COVID-0 policy. And while it is true that unemployment has fallen from 5.3% to 5.2%, the reality is that youth unemployment stood at over 21% in June of this year. And the truth is that, in general, economic forecasts for China are being revised downwards compared to previous methods in its history. For example, Goldman Sachs, which predicted that the Chinese economy would surpass the American economy in 2026, and that by 2050 its GDP would be double that of Uncle Sam's, had to revise its forecasts last year. At that time, it predicted that China would overtake the US by 2050, and that at most, it would exceed US GDP by only 15%. Perhaps they are even less optimistic today. In fact, more and more analysts are questioning whether China will even catch up with the United States, and that's talking about GDP in absolute terms, without taking anything else into account. And keep in mind that this is not an anti-China statement or anything of the sort. Quite the contrary, at VisualPolitik we have celebrated and recounted the great progress made by this country. A country that, in general terms, has made a very positive contribution to the world in the last 40 years. Even so, for a few years now, we have also been telling you that things are deteriorating, both economically and politically, or at least are no longer going well. We told you about it a couple of years ago, and that is what is happening, because beyond the propaganda, the data are on the table. Of course, wait a minute, because many of you consider that the fact that the Asian giant may not surpass the United States economically is excellent news. But guess what? Many of the analysts making this prediction also argue that this could pose a serious danger. But how is that possible? Isn't the opposite supposed to be the most dangerous thing? Well, listen up.
The mighty Chinese Navy.
I'm sure many of you have heard in recent years that the rise of China could put the United States in serious trouble. There have even been some reputable analysts, such as Graham Allison of Harvard University, who have suggested that the rise of China and the consequent fall of the United States would lead to an inevitable war. However, looking at China's current situation and its increasingly poor growth projections, many analysts are already beginning to set Allison's theory aside. Today, these analysts have begun to embrace another theory. China is reaching its peak, which is still below the United States. And once it reaches that point, it will begin its decline. Well, according to them, this scenario is the truly worrisome one for the United States and for the rest of the world. But why is that? For one simple reason. Because just as there is no animal more dangerous than one that is wounded, there is no country more dangerous than one that is in decline. When, in order to try to prevent their fall, they often resort to violence. And do you know what China has been doing all these years? Well, take a look. Indeed, it has been increasing its defense budget by 9% per year since the armed forces modernization announced in the 1990s was launched. In this way, China has reached a military budget of $224 billion by 2023, the second largest in the world. With all this money, China has been progressively modernizing its military capabilities and facilities. For example, it now has 1,700 combat aircraft, including J-11s and Su-30s, comparable to the American F-16 or the F-18. In fact, China now has the largest air force in Asia. But can you guess in which branch of the armed forces they have made the largest investment? 3, 2, 1, you guessed it, the Navy. China's naval modernization began in the 1990s and has resulted in the Chinese Navy becoming the largest in the world, at least in numbers, with 351 ships in 2022, ahead of even the US Navy, which had 294 ships that same year. What's more, not only does it have more ships, but their capabilities have also improved substantially since the 1990s. Among other features, thanks to the inclusion of ballistic missiles and anti-ship cruise missiles, along with other equipment. And not only that, China has also a large fleet of submarines, destroyers, and cruisers. And on top of that, it even has managed to establish itself as the second strongest power in terms of having the most aircraft carriers. In 2012 and in 2019, it presented its first two, and in 2022, it presented its third aircraft carrier, the Fujian, a ship that already has capabilities such as the use of catapults and an electromagnetic design used for launching jets. But do you think that with this large fleet, China could defeat the US Navy? Well, at the moment, it doesn't seem to be the case. You see, it is true that China has a larger number of military vessels. In fact, it is expected that by 2030, its navy will be even 50% larger than that of the United States. But the reality, VisualPolitik viewers, is that although Uncle Sam has fewer ships, theirs are bigger, more complete and capable. For example, compared to the Chinese aircraft carriers, the American ones are much larger, are nuclear powered, which gives them greater autonomy and can launch and operate a greater number of aircraft, even more than 60. Also keep in mind that the United States has more militarily crucial vessels such as aircraft carriers, cruisers, and destroyers, which would give them a clear advantage in a war scenario. Even so, regardless of whether China is preparing to peak and start falling or not, what is clear is that China has become a formidable military and particularly naval power. There is no doubt about it. But why so much investment in the Navy? Well, we're going to take a look at that right now.
A game of risk.
Many have tried to discover what China's strategy would be for becoming a superpower capable of standing up to the United States, and most have concluded that it all comes down to one region: dominance of the South China Sea. If China were to gain total control of this region, everything suggests that we could already be talking about a superpower on the level of Uncle Sam. You see, in this sea, there are proven reserves of 11 billion barrels of oil and even more natural gas. But what is really important about this sea is the enormous geostrategic advantage it would provide to the contender who manages to take it over completely. And in this case, the biggest contender is China. China's naval reinforcement is explained by its ambition to become a global power with the capacity to shape the international order, but also to secure and protect its maritime trade routes, since 80% of Chinese commercial operations are carried out along this route. For this reason, China has not hesitated to go beyond the international law and establish the famous 9-dash line to try to reduce the risk of a cut in the supply of strategic goods, such as oil, for example. As you may recall, the 9-dash line is the territory that China claims as sovereign, despite the fact that it interferes with the exclusive economic zones of neighbors such as the Philippines, Vietnam, Malaysia, and Brunei. Well, within this line, claimed by China, are islands that its neighbors also claim, such as those in the Spratly or Paracel Islands archipelagos, islands that China has taken by force, which it has militarized and artificially expanded. However, the main reason, or at least the most talked about in general, is not this, but China's intention to invade the island of Formosa, that is, Taiwan, in the near future.
China eyes armed unification with Taiwan by 2027, key academic. Taiwan foreign minister warns of conflict with China in 2027.
This is surely the biggest point of tension between the United States and China, among other reasons because Taiwan serves as a barrier that prevents China from having a free hand to expand into the Indo-Pacific. This is precisely why China is currently investing so many resources in its navy. Think about it. If China were to swoop in and take over the entire South China Sea, including Taiwan, the United States would have less ability to act, considering that its nearest fighter jets are more than 1,000 kilometers or 621 miles away in Okinawa and Guam. What's more, China could easily deploy fighter jets on the Spratly and Paracel Islands from its 4 air bases located at sea. And not only that, the Asian giant has established a strong radar system on the islands and also has a larger number of missiles in the region. However, However, do you really think it would be that easy to defeat the United States? As you can imagine, this is rather unlikely. Not only because the US has much more recent war experience and more advanced ships, but also because, as many Chinese analysts point out, in order to succeed in such a conflict, China would first have to solve some issues. We're talking about details such as the supply of arms to Taiwan from the United States, the lack of a plan in the face of the sanctions that would most certainly be imposed, the current inability to take over Taiwan extremely quickly, and a long list of et-ceteras. You see, VisualPolitik community analysts are already predicting the arrival of China's growth ceiling, yet far from ending China's aspirations to completely dominate the South China Sea and go head-to-head with the United States as a superpower. These predictions may be reinforcing them. Xi has already achieved China having the largest international military naval fleet. Now, the only question is, when will China show its full naval capability to the world? Is it true that China really won't catch up with the United States as the world's leading power? You can leave me your answer in the comments. And as always, don't forget that here on VisualPolitik, we release new videos every week, so go ahead and subscribe to this channel, hit that little bell so you don't miss any of our updates, and if you liked the video, which you did, come on, like it, and I'll see you in the next one. All the best, see you soon.